Matt, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here on Rolling Stock TV. We're talking today about ExcelWraps. Maybe we could just start off by telling me, how did you first come into contact with ExcelWraps?
I was working with, we had a problem, and as you know, John's background is structural engineer, a very renowned one. I approached Lloyd's. We had a weighing and balancing problem on the Hitachi trains. It was part of the overhaul, and it was a very, very long drawn out bit of a black art process. So I started hunting about, trying to find a solution to it. I approached Lloyd's consultancy, and at the time John was doing some finite element analysis for them, I believe on nuclear flasks. As I approached them, they said, we've got just the guy. And they brought in John. I had an initial meeting with John at Lloyd's, and it went from there. So subsequently, myself and John did a lot of work around the weighing and balancing using John's, very comprehensive structural knowledge. We came up with a bit of a solution to which John then put that into a standardized Excel format. At the same sort of time, we were progressing the overhaul, and something which no doubt we'll speak about later, inherently is very bad in the rail industry, is record keeping or paper record keeping. So in parallel to this problem with the balancing and weighing, we mentioned to John that it would be really nice to have some sort of electronic way of recording all the serial numbers, all the work that we were undertaking. So obviously there were things out there like PDFs and things, but it didn't really suit what we wanted. And the reason for that primarily was because you got what you got off the shelf. And unfortunately in the rail industry, there is a lot of systems that you can buy and they cost the earth. They don't really do what you want them to do, but you make them work. If you do want things changed, often the suppliers will want 7 to 8 months lead time to change a field, and probably cost, charge you £6,000 into the bargain. So basically that's how we started working together. John said, actually, I think I've got a bit of a solution for this. And so it sort of, the idea was born basically of being able to record the work on the overhaul, but also that solution was then applied to the weighing and balancing. So, from day one, it was very digress what ExcelWraps could do, or the early versions of that.
That's great. Thanks for that, Matt. How easy was it to implement the ExcelWrap system?
It was really easy. And one thing I always mention to John that I think, should be pushed with regards to ExcelWraps is that, we were very conscious about our guys using, tablets, and because the average age of our guys wasn't the youngest, and so not all of them were IT literate. So what we did, we pushed it out there and they absolutely loved it. But what they really loved about it was not only its simplicity. So you can imagine there are a lot of tasks that go on around an overhaul. A lot of work has to be recorded and signed and various bits and pieces. But what the guys really, really liked was that if the form wasn't laid out as maybe they worked, literally within 5-10 minutes, it could be changed. And they really, really loved that. So the sort of all the recording forms followed how they worked. And of course, that's something that you would not have been able to do with an off-the-shelf system. So, we would alter it or John would alter it. And literally within 10 minutes, it was live again for the guys to use. So, they really, really loved it. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, that was really great to us was that we could publish this sort of thing. So again, inherently on the railway, there are often issues with, old versions of documents being out there, signatures being missed. It's just people have a lot of priorities when they're working. So the beauty with ExcelWraps was that the sign-offs that we had meant that the work could not be signed off if it wasn't complete. So we had a lot of assurance that, you know, my guys, and I'm not just, my guys were very good at it anyway, but we had a lot of assurance that, you know, the work being done was all complete, because otherwise they couldn't sign it. So, you know, and also in the mornings we could upload the latest versions of the documents. The guys would see that as they logged in. We could mention any, you know, any updates to those documents. And so you do away with the whole issue of guys printing off odd pages, keeping them in their drawers. So it just made the whole thing. And obviously that expanded then into what we call AAW, which is additional arising work, which for a lot of people is a very important part of the overhaul, because it's extra chargeable work, if you like. So you can imagine, you know, when you have a supplier and a customer, they're very intent and want to see what AAW has been done. And obviously the supplier is very keen to get paid for that additional work. So the overall thing with ExcelWraps was, you know, at the end of it, you could see at any point in time where we were in the process of overhaul. It recorded AAW, you could add media to it because a lot of people want evidence. So you had this sort of system that was overarching, and really at a glance, you could see what you wanted to see. You know, you could fire off forms from it if you wanted to, emails, all sorts of things. But as I say, what surprised us was the way that, you know, that older guys took to it. We were really, really surprised. They really, really liked it, you know, and we were expecting a bit of resistance. Just one last thing to add on that. We also had wraps at our supplier. So we were based at Ashford. Our supplier at Unipart was doing some of the bogie, or all of the bogie overhaul work. Now, we could see live, real time, where they were in their process. So take that as you want, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it can be used for good or bad. But what was really great, we could log in and see exactly where they were in the overhaul process, which there's certainly not another system I'm aware of where you can do that. Now, you can imagine from that, you can, all sorts of things can stem. You know, you can, if you really wanted to, you could keep a bit of a watch on the progress. You could obviously look at issues they found, because they could add media, so they could point to things and tell you, add the media. If you really wanted to, you could use camera real time. If they had problems with certain tasks or figures they wanted you to see, you could log in at the same time as they could. And that was a massive bonus. We then started to roll that aspect out of it to other suppliers like Lucchini, who do the wheel sets. So if you can imagine, you know, you've got all these suppliers using wraps, which are all feeding into your wraps, which you are using on depot for your side of the overhaul. And all serial numbers and all this sort of thing can be collated without the general mistakes that the railway often brings.
I know one of your passions is competencies, and that's really important in the rolling stock industry. How have you seen that ExcelWraps is able to help people to use competencies?
Competencies inherently, you know, for a lot of years now, the railway has commanded that there needs to be competencies, you know, and everybody has different interpretations of that. There are task-based competencies, which everybody has an opinion on. The role that we're in now, and this is where it was born from, and it's very similar to consultancies, your main consultancies like SNC Lavallian, DBESG, Ricardo, and also for RSSB. So where all these sort of parties undertake work, it's not repetitive work. So you can imagine on a depot, you have a guy changing brake pads. He does that every day. So a task-based competency would be, okay, we are going to go and assess that guy changing brake pads. There's a lot of views and a lot of time that you could, you know, speak around whether you agree with that or not, but that's generally how the railway task-based competency is undertaken. when you get into the field that we're now in, and these other people I mentioned earlier, you can imagine they're not doing repetitive tasks or even the same tasks on the same trains. So you get to a point where, you go for a job and people say, well, okay, how do I know you're competent to do this? So I'd had an idea for a long time on how to show this, but also with a view to professional development, to go for your different eng techs, IEngs within your institutes. Again, inherently have always requested a hell of a lot of data, a hell of a lot of evidence. And historically that's been done by people keeping reams of paper and emails and taking them to the interview. So what we sort of thought was we could kill two birds with one stone here. So what we did, we approached RSSB and we asked them, we had this idea and said, actually, now would that be endorsable if we were to progress this route? The answer we were given was yes. And actually that is how RSSB's technical experts pretty much also prove their competencies. So you can imagine they're going in and doing, quite intense technical audits. So, they need to also be proven in their field. So where we went with it was we came up with a method where we would record work histories. So not a CV, because anybody can write anything on a CV, but basically this is all the projects we've done going 10, 15 years back. Some of mine stem back to 30 years, obviously before I had my own company. So what we started to do was to load those up, to write them up, which is obviously, initially to play catch up to the point where we are now. Takes a little bit of time, but now we're at a point where what we can do is every time we do a project, my guys or us write up what we've done on that project. That becomes a signature at the bottom as well, where when we finish it, because again, we could write anything, we ask our customer to countersign that. We can add media to that. And then we just say to somebody, well, this was the aspiration. Look, if you want to see our competency, we're not going to go down the whole task base. Log in and have a look at what we've done, all of us, and the projects we've worked on, etc. Also, we need to obviously keep academic records on there and CPD and all sorts. So to cut a long story short, Wraps just absolutely lent itself to it. So I approached John and Andy Armstrong, who I believe you've interviewed earlier, and asked Andy to put together what it was that we asked him to do. And again, it's now in place with everything I've previously mentioned. So what we've actually got elements in there. So when the guys are writing jobs up, without doing any additional work, because, CPD inherently people go, oh, that takes time. So just by doing the projects they're doing, those competencies are now mapped to the Engineering Council's competencies. So just by writing up what they're doing, all we ask them to do then is to have a look at, so the form for the different Eng Tech, IEng and CEng is contained in the Wraps. We ask them to read down their project write-up, and then basically it's a case of ticking the elements that meet the relevant criteria for IEng or Eng Tech, IEng or CEng. So the great thing is, not only are we recording that work, it's a work history that's can be as detailed or as simple as you wish, but also by default, with no extra work, the guys are they're gaining CPD, which is actually getting them very, closer and closer to either Eng Tech or IEng. So it was an ideal way, but that could not have been done with the systems that are out there. It can only have been done because we were quite, control freak, if you want to call it, but we had an idea in our head how we needed that to work. And I would say a vast majority of that was down to John and Andy, but that whole system was up and running, I think, within about 2 to 3 weeks, and now it's being used. My assistant, Kerry Ann, has been on the phone to Andy today to ask for a couple of tweaks. And there we go. We've already now got a system which we're starting to put our write-ups on. You can add media, as I said before, so you can add some pictures of what you've done. So all in all, that gives a new customer a hell of a lot of confidence, much more confidence than just presenting a CV, which quite frankly, you could write anything on.
I know you work really closely with the ExcelWraps team, but what do you see as some of the benefits of working with them?
What you get from John is and this isn't a cliche, but because John, like all of us in the rail industry, he's got an absolute passion for what he does. So apart from the fantastic support, and this isn't support where you might get from one of the massive players in IT. It's not a ring up and get a support ticket and I'll come back to you in 3 days, and all the time you're pulling your hair out. I mean, every time there is, which is very, very rare these days, but if there is, for example, when we produced the competency wraps, there was a very, very slight glitch at the beginning to do with adding media. So we just mentioned it to John, and literally the following day I got a call saying that that's now resolved. But I've always said to John, I think the biggest thing with wraps, and I believe this is where people need to see it in operation, because we can all sit here and talk about it, but the massive thing with wraps, and something I believe was never pushed enough, was the fact that you can change it. And I think so wraps can change with your business. So, you start off something, we did it with the competency, we had a few fields in there. Actually, we don't quite like we don't think that drop down needs to be there. So again, within 5-10 minutes, bang, it's changed. And I remember saying it to John in the early days, that is a massive, massive selling point for wraps, and something that you won't get anywhere else. So ultimately, if you have a person that can use Excel in any form, right from the most basic level up to the most complex, that person can actually design the form that they want to see. That then gets sent to John, who works his magic. And before you know it, you have your form, on the front end of a database doing whatever it is you want it to do. So what it in effect means is that anybody can produce a form. Most people at the very basic level can produce a form in Excel, send it to John, tell John what they want it to do. And now what you're seeing is that database is actually, stems from what that person wants to see, not what some IT guy wants that person to see or thinks he wants it to see. The biggest element in IT and designing the system is trying to transfer your ideas to an IT guy that maybe has no idea about your industry. And I'm sure that if you speak to IT guys, no disrespect, they will say there are methods for recording that, and there are, but there's certainly no substitute for just giving that form to John, saying that's what I want. And you can imagine that brings its benefits with it, because you save a humongous amount of time not trying to worry about the interface and how it looks. That element has already been done. So again, that's a massive leap forward to sort of getting the final database. And I would suggest that they are the main points. To be honest, I can't fault ExcelWraps. It's what's been needed for a lot of years, and hopefully now some of the bigger players will sit up and maybe think that they have got some serious competition.
For any business, return on investment is really important. Where do you see as some of the key returns on investments by using the ExcelWrap system?
Well, I can think of many, but certainly the first one that springs to mind is in the rail industry, there's a customer supplier relationship, whoever that may be. And what the customer always wants back from the supplier is records, proof of cost, all sorts of things. And certainly for a long amount of time now, that used to be done with something called CCFs, contract control forms, on ravers. So you would get a customer, a very those people that are aware of CCFs will know what I'm talking about. They would fill out a form, and on the back of that form, when it was complete, the customer would pay the supplier. So whether that was a Roscoe asking somebody to do an overhaul for them, whatever that was. And the system worked fairly well. I see ExcelWraps as a massively updated, and that's just one element version of that, whereby, as we mentioned earlier, paper records, with all the best intentions in the world, certainly in the 35 years I've been in the rail industry, I've never seen anybody get it completely right. So replacing those paper records with an online system that, one, you can't actually say is completed unless everything on that sheet is completed and it's signed for a start. That starts a process whereby, okay, people become aware of that. So they know that it's not going to be ignored. If that box isn't filled in, I can't sign that form. The customer is going to pick that up straight away from the online element of it. As we mentioned earlier, the customer can log in, see that X, Y, and Z is not complete. So not only can he see it's not complete, he can actually tell the supplier which elements are not complete. That's, of course, if the supplier's not picking it up at first, which, a good supplier would anyway. So you've got the element of payment and proof of payment. As we said earlier, AAW is a massive, massive part of the rail industry. AAW used to be along the lines of, okay, it's 12 o'clock at night on a Friday night, the supplier finds some AAW. Well, I need approval from the customer before I can do this. Well, you can't do it until we give you approval. Nobody's around. So inherently that used to roll over to a Monday or a Tuesday. They'd maybe finally get approval on a Wednesday. With ExcelWraps, you can add that media. The guy can log on from home. He can see a picture. If you really want, you can see a video of it. I can't think off the top of my head now, but I believe also it has the capability to log GPS systems. Now, when you're talking about, it may be that you have a wheel flat issue and you want to, and you want to understand where that's occurring. So GPS issues, bit of a sideline there, but so all of this sort of thing can be seen very, very quickly and therefore approved. So it eases the workflow, which is a massive thing. And we saw that actually work with Unipart on AAW. Very easy to approve, very quick just by logging on. Say even to the point, if you wanted to see it real time, the customer could say, well, can you spin the iPad round? I'd like to see that for myself. So there is that element as well. And so, I think for me, and I suppose the third main factor is data capturing. Now, everybody in the rail industry loves data. Again, either in the past, things haven't worked because that data hasn't been captured. And so projects tend to stall a little bit because they can't capture the data to maybe justify a modification. Data capture with wraps, again, by doing your daily stuff and everything else, you're building that data up to the point where if you want to, you can turn around, whether it's an additional service that you offer or whether it's part of your contract, you can actually turn around and say, look, we've done all these overhauls. We have got countless data based on spring rates, brush lengths, all sorts of data which people get excited about. Wheel lathes, for example, if they're turning third-party customers' work and they've got wear rates in there, again, wraps can be set up to do any of that. What you can actually do is at the end of the year, say to these customers, look, we've got quite a lot of data here based on what we've turned on your wheels. You may want to review that and maybe come up with some different planned term periodicities. Or, as I said, you can either sell that as a separate item or it can be part of your initial contract. So I would say for me, they are the three main things that wraps, well, I don't actually know of other systems that do that, if I'm honest. So to have the three elements come together, it's pretty much a no-brainer. And I've said to John, you know, what I think the problem is that we can talk about it a lot, but I would greatly encourage people, once you see it, you'll be hooked. You know, unfortunately, it can be talked about a lot and people tend to think it's another system, but everybody that I've seen actually see it in operation or see it live working with a customer's, you know, components, becomes hooked on it. And I think the more that you realize that you can alter, you can, you know, as we said before, it you know, it really does sort of draw you in, and you start to understand the capabilities that it can actually do. You know, and just as a very side issue, Kerry Ann, who works for us, has contacted John or via Andy Armstrong. She's just seen a really good sort of niche for it in what she does, which is the finance element. And she just rang me up today after seeing the competency one, and she said, "Oh, do you think I could get it to do this for outstanding POs?" So I said, "Yeah." So she's been on to Andy today, and I believe that's going to be done for us early next week. So straight away, you know, the offshoots to it are sort of endless, really.
Thanks again, Matt, for joining us today on Rolling Stock TV.